You may have heard of Japan as a country of advanced technology, safe streets, and an incredible culture. It might seem like the perfect place to live, right? But today we're going to look beyond that image and discover a side of Japan that few people know about. Behind all this progress, there is a group of people called the Lost Generation. These people represent about 15% of Japan's population, that is, almost 17 million people. They live isolated, unable to get jobs or lead a normal life. This story begins in the 1980s when Japan was growing rapidly. The economy was booming, and everyone thought it would never end. But in 1991, the economic bubble burst. Suddenly, the money disappeared, and many companies stopped hiring new employees. Imagine you graduate from university, ready to start your career, but all the doors close. This happened to millions of young people. Without getting their first job, they were left behind. And in Japan, if you don't get a job right after university, it's very difficult to get one afterwards. These people, the lost generation, ended up isolating themselves. Many still live with their parents, unable to form their own families or build a career. This has created a major problem for Japan, which is already facing a rapidly aging population. Let's learn more about these people and understand how the lost generation became a symbol of Japan's hidden struggle. What happened to them? And what does this mean for the future of the country? Stay with us to find out. Now, let's understand how Japan got into this situation, starting with the so-called economic miracle of the 1980s. In the 1980s, Japan was at its peak. The economy was growing rapidly, and the country seemed unstoppable. This growth was driven by cooperation between large groups of companies, called keretsu, and the government. These keretsu were alliances of companies that worked together and received a lot of support from the government. These companies had easy access to large amounts of money loaned by the National Bank of Japan. With so much money available, they could grow and invest endlessly. At the same time, the Japanese government made it difficult for foreign companies to enter the market, protecting its own companies. Everything seemed perfect. People believed that the economy would continue to grow forever. But this confidence created a speculative bubble. Everyone wanted to invest in real estate and stocks, believing that prices would never fall. Until, in 1991, the bubble burst. From one day to the next, the value of stocks and properties plummeted. The economy went into crisis. Companies that seemed strong began to fail. And it was clear that there was a lot of corruption. Many of these companies only stayed open because they took endless loans from the government, even when they were unable to pay. This crisis revealed a dark side of the Japanese economic miracle. Corruption was at every level, from the stock market to the government. Japan, once seen as a model of success, has come to be called the sick man of Asia. This economic downturn had a devastating impact, especially on young people just starting their careers. In the last chapter, we saw how Japan's economic miracle in the 1980s ended in a serious crisis. Now, let's understand how this crisis profoundly affected the Japanese job market and contributed to the creation of the lost generation. In Japan, getting a good job is a very specific and rigorous process. Large companies usually hire new employees only once a year. They look for fresh university graduates who are subjected to a selection process called Shishoku Katsudo. In this job-hunting ritual, thousands of young people dressed in black and white suits participate in group interviews and seminars, hoping to land a job. Once hired, these young people can expect employment for life, known as shashinko. Companies offer stability and security by promoting their employees only from within the organization, a system called shanikashin. But there's one big problem. If you don't get a job straight after university, you could be left out forever. When the economic bubble burst in 1991, many companies stopped hiring altogether. For most of the 1990s, there was a hiring freeze. Young people who graduated during this period did not get the job they dreamed of in big companies. And because the system is very rigid, they lost their only chance. These young people, who were left without job opportunities, became the lost generation. Without getting their first job, they were excluded from the job market. Many ended up taking temporary, low-paying jobs without the stability and security that their parents had. This exclusion had a profound impact. The lost generation lives in a situation of economic insecurity, unable to form families or plan the future. And this doesn't just affect them, but the entire Japanese society. In the previous chapter, we saw how the lost generation was excluded from the Japanese job market due to rigid hiring after the economic crisis. Now, let's understand how this affects not only these people, but the entire Japanese society. The lost generation, now in their 30s and 40s, faces great economic insecurity. Many have not been able to find good jobs and live on low wages. This means they have little money to spend, which affects Japan's entire economy. When people can't spend, stores sell less, companies earn less, and the economy slows down. Furthermore, many of these individuals still live with their parents, unable to form their own families. This is contributing to another major problem in Japan: an aging population. Currently, almost 30% of the Japanese population is elderly, and the situation is getting worse. Projections show that by 2050, for every elderly person, there will be only 1.3 people of working age. In other words, there will be almost as many elderly people as there will be people working. This is worrying because seniors depend on taxes paid by workers to receive their pensions and health care. With fewer young people working and more elderly people to care for, the system could become unsustainable. And this situation was worsened by the exclusion of the lost generation from the job market. Without stable jobs, they are unable to contribute to taxes and do not have children, which further reduces the young population. This demographic and economic crisis not only affects the present, but also the future of Japan. The country needs to find ways to integrate the lost generation and make its job market more flexible to prevent more young people from falling into the same situation. In the previous chapter, we saw how the exclusion of the lost generation related to Japan's economy and demographics. Now, let's explore a phenomenon that further exacerbates these challenges: hikikomori. Hikikomori are people who live in complete social isolation, often without leaving their rooms for months or even years. This mainly affects the lost generation, which, without job opportunities and great social stress, chooses to withdraw from social life. Currently, it is estimated that nearly 1 million people in Japan are hikikomori. Many of them are financially dependent on their parents, living at home and not seeking work or education. This situation puts enormous pressure on families, who need to support these members without any prospect of change. The hikikomori aspect is not just an individual problem, but a major social and economic challenge. When a person becomes hikikomori, they stop contributing to society and the economy. This means fewer people working, fewer taxes collected, and less consumption, which further harms the Japanese economy. Furthermore, prolonged isolation can lead to mental and physical health problems. Many hikikomori develop depression and anxiety, and a lack of physical activity can result in serious health problems. Japanese society is beginning to realize the seriousness of the problem, but there is still much to be done to help these people reintegrate. The hikikomori aspect is yet another reflection of the crisis that the lost generation faces. Without opportunities and under immense pressure, many feel helpless and choose to isolate themselves. For Japan, finding solutions to this problem is crucial to improving the lives of these people and strengthening society as a whole. In the previous chapter, we explored the hikikomori phenomenon and how it exacerbates Japan's economic and social challenges. Now, let's look at what the Japanese government is doing to help the lost generation and hikikomori reintegrate into society. The Japanese government recognizes the seriousness of the situation and has tried to create programs to help these people. They have launched several initiatives to provide psychological support, job training, and employment opportunities for the lost generation and hikikomori. One such initiative is the creation of rehabilitation centers, where hikikomori can receive counseling and participate in group activities to help them emerge from isolation. These centers also provide job training to help these people find jobs. However, these efforts face major challenges. The Japanese economy is still recovering from the crisis, and the job market remains very tight. Many companies still prefer to hire only young graduates and offer lifelong jobs, leaving little space for those who lost their initial chances. Furthermore, the work culture in Japan is very demanding. Long work hours and a rigid hierarchy make it difficult for people who are already struggling to adapt to such a stressful environment. Many hikikomori and members of the lost generation find it nearly impossible to reintegrate due to these cultural and structural barriers. Despite the government's good intentions, results have been limited. Many programs cannot reach everyone who needs help, and the lack of flexibility in the job market remains a major obstacle. It is clear that the solution to these problems requires profound changes in Japanese society and economy. So, what did you think of all this? Tell me in the comments what intrigued you most. I'll leave this video here on your screen so you can discover some interesting facts about this unknown world with fascinating places. Don't miss it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to have first-hand access to new videos.